I was 5 years old and I stood at the end of a dock. My mom and dad were both with me loading things into a little rowboat tied to the moorings. Earlier that summer, my dad had taught me how to fasten a boat to a dock, and I stared at the rope as it went slack and then tightened as the gentle waves of the lake ebbed and flowed underneath the vessel. I was used to going to different lakes with my family, so standing there as they worked to ready a boat wasn't odd. It was the boat that had me confused. It was a little wooden rowboat with small oars draped over the bench seats. My family didn't usually use a rowboat when we went to the lake, except for on the rare occasion that my dad took me fishing. Mom didn't usually come with us. My parents whispered urgently to each other, shooting nervous glances at me as they finished their tasks. Finally, Dad came over and put his hands on my shoulders. "We're gonna get your brother and sister. You need to stay here," he whispered. "You'll be safe." But I want to go. More than anything, I didn't want to be left alone. "You can't." Mom hugged me briefly. Both of my parents kissed me goodbye. My heart broke, and I started to cry. They got into the boat and untied it from the dock before pushing out. Their oars dipped quietly into the water, and static electricity burned inside my lungs and heart as I watched them go. They reached an outcropping of the mountain that sank deep into the water. There was a circle of heavily pitted stone that stuck out inconspicuously out of the rock wall. My dad pressed his hands against it, and a stream of green smoke poured out of the circle, enveloping my parents and their boat. And when the smoke dissipated, they were gone. After a few moments of waiting, a witch's cackle echoed all around the lake, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. When the laughing stopped, I heard my mom and dad screaming, their voices mingling with the tormented wails of my brother and sister. I stood on the dock, completely alone, knowing for certain that I would never see my family again. I had that dream when I was 5. All my life, I've been plagued by extremely vivid dreams. My dreams are so realistic that while I'm asleep, I can't distinguish them from reality. As you might imagine, my nightmares can be pretty traumatizing, which is why even after 27 years, I still remember this particular dream as if I just had it. Welcome to CC Writes. My name is CC Lepke, and today we're using our imaginations. Unsurprisingly, I don't have trouble visualizing my stories. Even my daydreams are so realistic that it seems like I could reach out and touch them. But that's not the case for everyone. There are varying levels of a person's ability to visualize things, ranging from my extreme level, where my imagination is almost indistinguishable from reality, to people who are incapable of even bringing up cartoonish images in their minds, something known as aphantasia. Having aphantasia doesn't mean you lack creativity. I've heard of plenty of artists and creatives who have aphantasia. It just means that you have to work a little differently. Regardless of whether or not you're capable of bringing up images and scenes inside your head, it doesn't change the fact that visualization in stories is a terribly helpful tool for creating realism and depth in your work. Which is why today I wanted to go through the different methods you can use to visualize your work when your ability to see it in your head is a bit lacking. The best part is that these methods aren't just for people who can't picture images. This will work for anyone who needs a solid idea of how to play out a scene in their story. Even I use these methods on a regular basis. So if you're a writer who wants to create grounded and realistic stories, keep watching. I've got 5 great exercises you can use to better visualize your scenes and characters. Starting with reference photos. Reference photos are pictures of people and places that are fundamentally similar to the ones I want to use in my story. You've probably heard of location scouting for movies and TV shows. Reference photos are kind of like that. It gives you a framework you can use to better describe scenes and people. There are a few ways that you can cultivate your reference photos. Google, Photoshop, stock photo sites like Pexels, artwork, or your own photos. I have a pretty long camera roll of interesting places I visited, and sometimes I'll use a mixture of these things to create an image that is as close to what I want as possible. For instance, the story I'm working on now has a character that is a fairy with black eyes and hair that's supposed to look like stars in the sky. I wanted her to be truly ethereal. So I started with a basic search through Pexels, a free stock photo website. This isn't sponsored, by the way, I just use them for a lot of my B-roll and images. So I found an image of a woman hypnotizing another woman by Mikhail Nilov. The woman at the bottom of the photo is the one I'll focus on. She's got black eyes that I can emphasize and black hair that can easily be manipulated the way I want. And just to show that you can get a good enough reference image from a free program, I used Canva, which is also not sponsored, to change the image to get close enough to how I wanted my character to look, including a second stock image called Blue, Pink, and White Andromeda Galaxy Way from Miriam Aspasia on Pexels. I now have a perfectly good image to use as a reference for my character's facial features. Is it a perfect photo? No. But no one's going to see it anyway, so my editing can be as bad as I want it to be as long as I have a pretty good idea of what things should look like. Reference videos can be used for a lot of different things, but I like to use it as a way to better visualize fights, facial expressions, and minor actions that people make. It can also be used to help you better establish a setting in your story. The way you cultivate reference videos is pretty similar to reference photos. I only ever use clips. B-roll of backgrounds, people, facial expressions, fights, whatever you need to help you better describe a scene or the way people interact with the world. You don't need clips that are exact replicas of your story either. Let's say, for instance, you wanted to write a fight scene where people are using martial arts, because as we all know, conflict is pivotal to creating a story. Using several clips of people fighting martial arts to map out your scene is perfectly fine, even if their environment isn't the same as the one you want for your story. So I recommend kung fu movies, stock video sites like Pexels, and even YouTube training videos. Try to go to a local martial arts studio and see if they'll agree to let you take a video of people sparring for reference. I don't know how to fight, so using video reference in this way is super helpful for me. It can also be good to get a more refined idea of how people express emotion. Sometimes we have a habit of describing emotion the same way every time, but using video reference to help you more clearly define the nuance of expression can be a valuable tool. In the book I'm working on, I have a scene with a riot in a marketplace. To create my visualization, I'll take a clip from a marketplace to establish a setting. The time-lapse video of a marketplace at Chepchowan City by Taryn Elliott from Pexels is a great wide view to use as reference. Getting in closer to the street vendors, I'll use People in the Market at Nighttime by Olivier Pelome, also from Pexels. That adds a bit more detail. And for the fight scene, I went to YouTube and found real footage of people fighting over tables. I won't show the footage here for obvious reasons, but it was the best reference I could find for people doing an all-out brawl over a marketplace stall. Pieced together like this, I can easily describe the hustle and bustle of a marketplace, the tense dispute between opposing factions, and the sudden eruption of violence. Scene dioramas are most helpful for establishing a scene and keeping track of the actions of all of the people who exist within the scene. They can also keep your scenes more grounded since it helps you keep track of distances and where everyone is in relation to one another. There are a lot of ways you can create scene dioramas. If you're the crafty sort, you can build them from cardboard, foam, resin, and other crafting supplies. The diorama can be simple and makeshift or extremely complex and detailed, whatever you prefer. I personally like to keep things simple. For instance, if I were to make a diorama, I would probably bust out my Lego set and build just enough to give me an idea of where everything is. So if I were to map out my market scene that I visualized through video clips, it might look something like this. Character improv exercises will make it easier to nail down your characters. It's sort of a way to live inside of your character's skin and inhabit their thought process. Charles Dickens was actually known to use this method when trying to get a better understanding of his characters. And bonus, character improv exercises are super fun. Pick a character from your story and start by walking in a circle. First, try to embody how that character walks. Everyone has a unique gait, so try to really understand them by the way that they move. Next, figure out how your character would interact with things in your immediate environment. How do they sit, stand, lean? What is their default facial expression? Once you have the physicality of your character down, pretend you're giving that character an interview. Don't just think of how your character would respond verbally, but also try to get an idea of their body language. How do they respond physically to the interviewer and each question? If you can, record it so that you have something visually to work off of as well. Then rinse and repeat for any major character that you need help figuring out. Puppet shows not only will help you better understand your characters, it's a great way to establish better dialogue. Dialogue is one of those things that a lot of writers have trouble getting right because they're so determined to make their characters say pretty and poignant things. Using puppet shows will help you figure out what things your character would say naturally and identify those times when your characters go into a needless monologue. Puppet shows are my favorite tool. You don't actually need puppets to make this work. You'll notice I have a whole host of various stuffed animals around my house. These have been the main characters of my personal puppet shows for years. You can also use action figures, figurines, or even miniatures like the ones from Warhammer or Dungeons and Dragons. The cheap little army guys you can get at the dollar store work. Honestly, you could use gummy bears, animal crackers, or even your silverware. Anything could be a puppet. Just figure out what to use to represent your characters and then have them play out a basic scenario. I also recommend recording your puppet shows just to make it easier to remember the dialogue and scene direction you come up with on the spur of the moment. These exercises might feel a bit uncomfortable or childish at first, especially the ones that require you to actively act out your scenes. But contrary to popular belief, writers don't have to be curmudgeonly cranks holed up in dark rooms all day, pounding on a keyboard as they smoke a cigarette and view the world with weary cynicism. I firmly believe that writing should be fun, and no one has more fun than a child playing pretend. You can use each of these visualization methods to build off of each other and craft a detailed scene that will give you plenty to work with when writing your story. Be as creative as you need to be, and remember to have fun with it. Visualization is the best way to create a realistic piece of work where you won't feel like you have to grasp for the details. Use these visualization exercises and keep the details right at your fingertips. If you liked my writing visualization exercises and want to see more from me about how to write, check out the video on the top where I talk about how to write prose. Otherwise, click on the bottom video to see what YouTube recommends. As always, thank you so much for joining me today on CC Writes. I hope you enjoyed our time together, and I will see you later.